at the conference Marjorie, McShane, professor at the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute at Troy, New York, United States. She is a renowned specialist in semantics and computational semantics, a specialist in ellipsis. She's going to tell us about reference resolution in English and Russian. Thank you.
Hi. So first, I'm very happy to be here. I was really honored to be invited. And I have actually sort of a narrow topic and a broad topic for today. So the narrow topic is, in fact, reference resolution. With reference resolution being defined as how we can enable intelligent agents to detect and fully resolve all referring expressions. The broad topic, however, is what I'll call holistic natural language understanding. Within the ONTOSEM framework, if you were at the round table last night, you heard a bit about that. So the idea is to work on sub-problems within the context of trying to solve a whole problem, rather than choosing just a small problem and assuming that the world outside that problem doesn't exist for you. So what is the whole problem? I think the whole problem is enabling intelligent agents to understand language with the proficiency of people. Okay, this is definitely artificial intelligence, not just computational linguistics. Artificial intelligence on the whole. And a compelling desideratum within this framework is to reuse knowledge resources and processing and reasoning engines across agents, languages, and applications. That is, this ONTOSEM environment is largely language independent. So, a bit about history of me, actually. So I started out, actually, doing Russian-English lexicography. If you've ever seen the Russian-English Dictionary of Idioms, the Random House one, I was actually the second banana writing that one. Then I moved to ellipsis in Russian and Polish for the PhD. But after the PhD, I sort of faded out of Slavic and did computational linguistics in a general sense within the ONTOSEM paradigm and Sergey's research group. But then the whole research group actually switched from just computational linguistics into modeling intelligent agents. So for a few years, I worked with physicians, for example, building working simulations of esophageal diseases. And I really know a lot about the esophagus. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Then actually, within this agent modeling, we of course had to have a fully working cognitive side of the intelligent agent, which brought us back to all the difficult problems of language analysis, including reference resolution in English. And now what we're doing is we're trying to take this environment and make it multilingual. So now I'm back to reference resolution in Russian, also other languages we're looking at, which includes the original topic of interest, of course, ellipsis in Russian. Which is sort of nice how life sometimes gives us these opportunities, and this is one of the nice ones. Okay. Now, I'm not going to be able to talk a lot about heuristic evidence for how one resolves ellipsis or detects ellipsis or any of that. If anyone has any interest in actual heuristic evidence, that is, my original research question was, how can I, as a non-native speaker, figure out when Russians allied subjects, objects, and verbs? So that's my question for myself. And I actually spent a number of years researching that question. I think that there are a lot of computationally tractable heuristics that I found to try to help with that answer. They're published. You can look at them if you're interested. So this is ellipsis in Slavic descriptively, and then reference computationally. Again, more heuristic evidence, more computational approaches to things. So, the way I look at it, reference resolution for intelligent agents is all about memory. It's not about text strings. It's not about linking this word to this word. That has nothing to do with it, really. So what really is it about? What you have to do is you have to create anchors in memory for new referring expressions. So if you have the sentence, a bird flew into the room, you need a new anchor in the agent memory that refers to this bird. If you have, however, a context like a bird flew into the room and it seemed disoriented, for the it, you have to add the it and all its information, seemed disoriented, to the anchor that you originally established for bird. So again, it's all about memory management. The fact that it can help to link it to bird in the text is simply a useful heuristic. It's not the end of the problem. Memory is the end of the problem. So compare this with the co-reference resolution task. Any of you who might be familiar with the American literature on reference resolution, computational literature, will probably know about this task. The idea was to create a task that research groups could compete upon. And this task is actually a very narrow task. If reference resolution is this, the task is here, okay? Leaving most of reference phenomena outside of the space of interest. So all you had to do in this task was try to link text strings, that is, link words that were co-referential. Nothing about memory here. This was pretty much semantics free for most competitors. And it only covered precise co-reference, like the bird and it. It did not cover bridging constructions, like I walked into my kitchen and the window was open. Okay? The window is part of the kitchen. That's why you use the instead of a. And that's part of reference resolution, of course, excluded from this task. No set member relations were involved. No generic concrete relations were involved. The task only covered NPs, not referential verbs. By the way, most verbs are referring expressions. We'll get to that a bit later, but they are. And it only covered single NP constituent co-reference. So therefore, if you have something like, it rained all night and the storm ruined my newly planted garden, this would be excluded because the storm refers to the clause rained all night. Again, that's out. You also couldn't have split NP co-reference. So once our cat got used to our new dog, they became best of friends. Split co-referent outside. So essentially everything interesting to a linguist got excluded from this task. Everything that was pretty easily accessible to annotators of corpora and to people building machine learning oriented systems was included in the task. Okay? I'm mentioning this only because if you come from kind of United States or kind of, I think a lot of Western Europe has also followed this paradigm, this is reference resolution in computational linguistics. It's not reference resolution in real life. But it is a task made in heaven for those machine learning methods. Okay. Oh, just one other thing, is that within this task, they provided all competitors with a perfectly annotated corpus, okay, both for training and for evaluation. So if the scope of phenomena wasn't already very narrow, making this not a really realistic proxy for the actual task, then the fact that you had these unbelievably great prerequisites at your disposal, then that made it really a not good proxy for the actual task. Okay, so I'm going to talk about reference resolution within the onto-agent paradigm. Now, onto-agent is basically an agent development paradigm, research paradigm. And the eyeballs here, the purpose for the eyeballs is to show that we really do have sort of a functioning physiological and cognitive agent. I'm only talking about the linguistic aspects of the agent right now, but understand that there is more of an agent around this. So the agent has lexical and ontological resources, reasoning engines, all of these static resources that you see over here, and it has a typical pipeline of analysis that you're used to. Actually, it's not really a pipeline. We have some loops in here, we have some loops in here. There are lots of loops everywhere. But anyway, let's call it a pipeline for simplicity's sake. And the real point that I want to make is that whereas reference resolution tends to be imagined as this box, this module after semantic analysis, if you do semantic analysis, and if you skip semantic analysis, then it's after syntactic analysis, right? In fact, if we incorporate reference resolution into various aspects of the pipeline, we can actually improve what's happening in each stage of the pipeline. Okay? So that's the big idea. Now we'll work through it. Okay. Just a little bit of background on onto-agent. If you weren't here at the round table last night, you missed a lot, but just a couple of words about it. So the idea is to have multifunctional intelligent agents that collaborate with people and applications. The OntoSem language processing aspect of this was originally for interlingual machine translation. Therefore, the ontology, the language-independent ontology, is at the center of this entire enterprise. We're trying to model what people do, not necessarily how they do it. And we're incorporating a lot of expectations, world knowledge. We're working right now in the medical domain, well, it's kind of not a toy domain, it's a kind of big domain, but nevertheless, it's a domain, not anything in the world. And we're trying to balance near-term utility with long-term goals, and theoretical desiderata with practical constraints. Okay, this is just a little schematic of the virtual patient. I just want to draw your attention to the fact that we have this physiological agent and the cognitive agent. And the most important fact about that the agent has two parts is that those parts actually really interact with respect to memory. So again, whatever happens in the agent's world, it has to remember, whether that's physical, whether it's physiological, whether it's the events the agent does, whether it's incoming speech, it all ends up in memory. So again, reference resolution is about memory. All of the agent's interactions with the world are really about memory. Okay, what does semantic analysis for intelligent agents mean? Well, it means interpreting input using unambiguous ontological meta-language. Okay, so like the word play, there are lots of different concepts that could be used to convey the meaning of the word play, like play musical instrument, play sport, and about 10 others. You also have to make all relevant language-oriented inferences, like detecting indirect speech acts, metaphors, things like that. Then you have to populate agent memory with the results of the analysis, which centrally involves reference resolution. So let's work on an example. Вчера Саша играла как зверь и заснула к 8 часам. Now, if I want, first of all, we have to detect which entities there are referring expressions. All of the orange entities are referring expressions. Вчера Саша играла, заснула к 8 часам. Okay? But the question is, but they're not resolved referring expressions yet, right? So the question is, when is yesterday? What's the actual moment, like day and time of yesterday? Who is Sasha? What kind of playing is she doing? Musical instrument, baseball, what? 8 in the morning or in the evening? And of course we have to detect that zvier is not a referring expression here. So that's outside of the context of reference resolution. So analysis is possible only in context. So if I'm talking to my mom on the phone on March 27, 2014, then yesterday is March 26, 2014. Sasha is that dog. Played incorporates some aspects of ran, fetched a ball, wrestled with my other dog, chased squirrels, other things that dogs do. Like crazy means long and intensely, and 8 o'clock is 8 p.m. Now, getting this interpretation, of course, or even saying this sentence to begin with involves mind reading. So, in saying this, I know my mom knows the most important Sasha in my life, how she plays, either via observation and dialogue, and then it's atypical for her to fall asleep by 8 o'clock, which makes this communication relevant. So the idea is the whole point of any communication is to further populate the other person or intelligent agent's memory. Now here's the big deal. Why do we care about this level of understanding? Well, what I want to build before I die, although I probably won't, is like a robot helper, right? If I want the robot helper to know, and I say, go out and play with the dog for a while, right? I want the helper to go throw a ball for the dog, or wrestle with the dog, or run with the dog, not take out a deck of cards and start playing cards with the dog, right? But if I say the same thing about, I don't know, my nephew or something, the robot has to do something different. The only way to actually teach the robot to do these different things is somehow to figure out what's going on in language that conveys exactly what I'm talking about, right? A lot of world knowledge involves a lot of reasoning, a lot of mind reading. And by the way, if you're realizing now that reference resolution is also all about semantic analysis, yeah, it is. That's why I think it's really wrong to be looking at reference resolution at the end of some pipeline, assuming someone else is going to apply semantics someday, and then, okay, fine, then we'll slap our reference resolution at the end of the semantics pipeline. It's not going to happen that way. Okay, so what is dog playing ontologically? Well, let's say it's a recreational event, and let's say it's down here. Okay, so it's some kind of play amusement. It's a sibling of play adult and play child. And I had really an interesting correspondence with Igor Boguslavsky about this paper when I showed him a draft. I said, well, if you say that there's going to be a play dog, what if you have like different ways that children play, right? So Japanese children at 2 years old play differently than American children at 2 years old. They play differently than 4-year-olds, right? So do you have to have concepts for all these different things? Well, it depends what you want your agent to do. If your agent doesn't care a bit about playing, then no. But if you want your agent to actually be able to play differently with the different children, what else is your choice? You have to actually split this way. So the idea is that underneath these ontological concepts, you've got to have the inventory of events and the participants in those events and how those events interact, because otherwise you just can't have the robot do this. So just if you're interested, there's an interesting article by Ray Jackendoff in which he says something along the lines of, if linguists don't treat all aspects of meaning, that is, if they only confine themselves to linguistic meaning, who else is going to take care of this? What, the philosophers, he said? Something like that, really kind of cute and funny. But it's true, who else is going to do this, right? Someone has to do it, and I think computational linguists are as good people as any. I mean, if I can work on esophageal disease modeling, I don't mind working on this either, right? So what do ontological concept descriptions look like? This is actually a very primitive, very limited view of some of the aspects of ontological concept description. So the play dog event, the agent is dog, has event as part. These are the parts that could be part of this event. So again, if you think of scripts in the Shankian sense, then these really are kind of subscripts. Each of these, like play, fetch, chase, dig, can also open up into its own subscript, right? The effect of play dog is happiness for the dog at a range of greater than 0.8 on a scale of 0 to 1, and the duration of this is usually between, I don't know, 10 minutes and 2 hours, and et cetera, et cetera. There are lots of other properties you have in this particular frame. So what is the sufficient meaning representation? Again, it depends on what you want your agent to do. So on the one hand, you could say that Sasha was playing, that for you, play amusement is good enough, right? At the top of this subtree, play amusement, there's no special play dog, play child Japanese, just play amusement is fine. Fine. If that's good enough for you, go for it. On the other hand, you might actually want to have this Sasha being a dog, she's the agent of play dog, and you want to know which sub-events are actually expected within that. Does the choice come down to easier or harder? That is, would you choose option 1 because it's easier rather than option 2 because it's harder? Well, not necessarily. Here's the thing, that the word play has to be disambiguated anyway, right? So Yo-Yo Ma was playing, he could be playing with his dog, I mean, he could be doing anything, but anyway. Default understanding is play musical instrument. The Pittsburgh Penguins were playing, that's a play sport, or play ice hockey if you have it. Sasha was playing is play amusement or play dog. Nikki was playing play amusement or play child. Then all the idioms come in, right? Play someone for a fool, play a joke on, play into someone's hands. The fact is, if you don't even want to get into all these subtypes of playing, you still have to be able to somehow figure out that play for a fool is not an instance of play amusement. So you still can't completely get away from the semantic problem, even if you want to be a little bit more coarse-grained in your description. So, a text meaning representation for this example. Sasha played like crazy yesterday. It's a play dog event. Instance number 435. Just say it's the 435th time that we had this event instantiated in the agent's memory. Has the agent of this dog we're talking about, dog 27, intensity 1, on the scale of 0 to 1. That's very intensive. Absolute time, month, day, well this is March 13, 2014. The relative time is before the fall asleep event. The fall asleep event has the experiencer of our dog, etc., etc. This is, so basically, again, to return to the question of yesterday's round table, this is what Anto Sem thinks of as a sufficient text meaning representation. One could also add lots of other details, but I kind of simplified here. Now, how do you get to it? Well, you get to it via a computational lexicon that is highly specified. So here we have, I have to kind of show you some stuff. Here we have this V1, first verbal sense of play, the syntactic structure. This requires a subject. This is the head verb, optional direct object. The semantic structure says, if you choose this sense, instantiate an instance of play musical instrument concept. Make that agent the meaning of whatever var1 was. Make the theme whatever the direct object was here. Now the ontology provides the constraints on what the agent and theme have to be. So if these constraints are not met, you will not choose this sense. This is how the machine goes about disambiguating. So John is playing his cello. Again, if you knew John was a musician, you would with very high confidence select this sense. If you knew John was a dog, you would not select this sense. Okay, again, play V2, this would be of dogs and their play dog event, because the default agent for this particular sense is dog. If you wanted a generic play, you could have play V3. We have a lot of plays actually in our ontology. Charlie is playing in the backyard. Now, if you didn't know if Charlie was a human or a child or an adult or a dog, you could just use this play amusement concept. It's more vague, but nevertheless, it's perfectly probably adequate for a lot of contexts. Just so you know, there's a generic rule in the analyzer to prefer more specific constraints over broader constraints. So if you know Sasha is a dog, you will select the play dog sense. If you don't know who Sasha is, you'll select the play amusement sense because it's some kind of an animal. Okay, so what happens when an agent encounters a whole lot of text about a given entity? It builds up its fact repository of that entity. Okay, so basically you could have our dog 27 being the agent of this particular play dog event at some point in time, being the agent of a chase event along with another dog, or two dogs, being the agent of a wrestling event with some other dog, whatever, play, fetch, etc. Right? So what happens is the agent populates its memory using all of these different meaning representations. So After I would say this utterance to my mom, say, and after an intelligent agent would hear this utterance, I would want to be able to assume that my mom or the agent would know that Sasha was running and or digging or wrestling or fetching. So should an intelligent agent. Okay, so this depth of analysis is a big challenge, but it's not impossible, right? It takes work. That's what it takes. No big deal. Just sit down and work. One of the interesting things about sociology is that at some point, some people in the field of I don't know, language processing and artificial intelligence decided that we could automate the process of knowledge acquisition. Someone just decided that this is a good idea and this can happen. I find it interesting, though, that no one has ever suggested, to my knowledge, that we should automate the process of writing computer programs. Or we should automate a lot of other processes. But somehow the notion of knowledge acquisition became just like, we're going to be able to automate this. And it's not at all true that that is possible. And so, maybe in part, but not necessarily entirely. But sitting down and actually encoding this kind of information would be really useful if we'll do it. Okay, so the goal of this whole research paradigm is to make progress over the long term on fundamental issues of semantic analysis, including reference resolution, with, very importantly, no ceiling of results. The paradigm of make a system, have it done in a year, then chuck it, is really, I think, sad. I understand why it exists in the world, but I don't belong to that paradigm. We want useful interim results, that is, building systems that will only be at all useful in 100 years is rather uninteresting. We also have no assumption that preconditions will be fulfilled by somebody else, right? If we want the heuristic, we have to know how to get it. So for example, compare this with centering theory. If you've ever read about the centering theory of reference resolution, they assume a lot of prerequisites to be fulfilled before centering theory can work. Like, for example, that you know what the theme and the reme are, and a lot of other definitions that are impossible to define. We don't go that direction. If we can't define it, we don't use it. So how? Approach every problem from the point of view of overall text analysis. That is, it's kind of interesting that it might seem like it's easier to split problems and only deal with one small problem area, but the fact is, if you do that and you don't allow yourself heuristics from other domains, you very often make your problem a lot more difficult than it has to be. So we actually are trying to incorporate, not only to make things harder or more robust, but actually it's easier in a lot of cases. So all engines that we have can be applied to any task, and all knowledge bases that we have, either built ourselves or can incorporate and use, can also be consulted at any time. Okay, so let's get back now squarely to reference processing. All of that background was necessary just to show that reference, again, within this framework doesn't happen without overall analysis. So the first thing to do is to detect the referring expressions. So we have to detect that all of those things in orange are actually referring expressions. Then we have to resolve those referring expressions, which means linking objects and events to an established anchor if it exists in memory, or creating a new anchor in memory. Resolving all relative expressions of time and place, that is, when was yesterday exactly, and do this processing based on the substrate of a semantic analysis of the text. Okay, so when we have already kind of processed our sentence, in the agent's memory about dog 27, this particular dog, it will already have previous information about personal name, family name, has owner, color, weight, birth, whatever it knows about it. Plus, it's the agent of this new event of play dog and experiencer of this new event fall asleep. We're talking about hundreds and thousands of events that can populate memory. Okay, so where are we in actually implementing what I'll show you in a minute? Well, we're working on the English system right now, and I'm going to talk about how I think this can be applied to Russian without making any claims about natural language understanding technologies in Russian. I haven't read much about it recently, okay? So I don't know what you all are doing. I'm just saying that if I were to approach Russian within the framework that we're using, this is how I would approach it. By the way, we've done a lot of multilingual work within the environment. It's not the first time we're doing multilingual work. We simply haven't done it with respect, namely, to reference resolution. Okay, so back to our intelligent agent. You all know what pre-processing is, right? We have segmentation and morphological analysis, all the usual named entity recognition, right? So then we have reference resolution engine 1. We have a preprocessor that we actually take from Stanford. Stanford has a preprocessor and a syntactic analyzer for English. So preprocessor pushes out some preprocessing information. The first reference engine does two things. It gives a full semantic resolution of some named entities, and it does certain kinds of ellipsis detection. I'll show you how. Okay. So the named entity semantic resolution, for the input string, Army Captain Patrick Horan, the Stanford preprocessor will output that parentheses structure you see. Now you see that there's syntactic information about it, or part-of-speech information, but it's not semantic information. We convert that into the text meaning representation you see, which is human with whatever index it gets, like 1, has title, Army Captain, has personal name Patrick, has surname Horan. How do we do it? We have an engine. We simply built a bunch of rules that actually look for certain kinds of things, and we transform this. So why resolve so early? Well, the reason is because knowing the semantic class of an entity can actually help you when you carry out the semantic disambiguation of the clause, right? So I saw Dr. Jones yesterday is very likely a consult instance, whereas I saw Niagara Falls yesterday is a visual event, right? So the earlier you can resolve things, the earlier you should resolve things. Why wait till this post-semantic reference resolution engine? And there's also, we can do lightweight ellipsis detection here. So we found that, looking at corpora, that if you have a modal word or an aspectual word, like in the first example, could, right? I wanted to run 10 miles if I could. If any of these words occurs right before a period, you can be darn sure that there's an elided verb there. Okay? If you know there's an elided verb there, tell the syntactic analyzer, because it'll make life easier for it, not to mess up the parse, right? It knows a verb is there, give it that information. Again, we're not saying to resolve this right now, we're just saying that to let it know. And it's limited to hard discourse breaks, periods, semicolons, and colons. You might think it might be useful for commas as well, but there are actually lots of counterexamples with commas, so you can't go that way. Okay. Then we have syntactic analysis. Okay, again, Stanford parser gives us a syntactic analysis. Then we have to put in a lot of work to actually make that jive with our lexicon, right? So figure out how their syntactic analysis can be incorporated with our lexical knowledge. We do that, and right after that engine fires, we have reference resolution engine number 2. So it detects several types of structures that are potentially elliptical. And we don't know for sure right now, but it's potentially elliptical. And adds reference-oriented metadata to the current state of analysis to support further downstream processing. So we're going to look at 2 examples simply here. Gapping. Gapping is a well-known type of ellipsis in which you have essentially 2 parallel clauses, subject, verb, object, or subject, verb, some other kind of argument, and then you have the same structure with the verb missing in the second half. So Lori ate a sandwich and Mary a salad. The other construction is unexpressed second subjects in VP conjunction structures. Tom had a sandwich and went to work. I'm only going to talk about the first one for reasons of time. You can look at the paper for the second one. So the fact is that the Stanford parser gets gapping wrong every time. But it's actually great for us because they get it wrong in the same way every single time, right? So if you have consistency, you can actually make a rule that overcomes the error, right? So it treats gapping structures like appositives, right? So as if Mary were herself a salad, okay? But great, I mean, we can use that. So what we do is we detect syntactic configurations that might indicate gapping. Doesn't mean that every appositive structure is a gapping construction. No, we have ways of trying to weed out the ones that aren't. We copy the verbal string from the first conjunct. So we'll make a copy of aid. We add metadata to the copied string that blocks instance coreference, right? This is not the same instance of eat, it's the same type eat, right? So in one case, Lori was eating, and in another case, Mary was eating. So this helps reference resolution later, because that's one of the questions in reference resolution. What kind, if you have a co-reference relationship, what kind of relationship is that? And then it reinterprets the incorrect NP coordinate structure as a clausal coordinate structure with a gap, which of course then supports semantic analysis. So this syntactic output is much better input to this semantic analyzer. So applying this to Russian, gapping, exact same kind of structure you have as in English. Detection of subject ellipsis in VPs, exact same thing as in English. Again, I'm assuming that the Russian parser works kind of sort of like an English parser might work. Yeah. Oh, okay. Also, detection of some cases of main verb ellipsis in subjectless sentences should probably be possible at this point, right? So if you have a totally subjectless sentence, there could be ellipsis there. And again, there are certain kinds of lexical expectations you can have, and I have a lot of descriptive work about this. But yeah, the more you might want to and be able to detect at this point that you have a missing verb of motion here. Okay, also, you can probably, if you want to, detect some instances of subject and direct object ellipsis using lexically recorded selectional constraints. The idea is this. If a given verb in every single one of its lexically recorded sentences requires some kind of an argument, a subject and or an object, and that subject or object is missing in your clause, then there's a very good chance it was elided. So you could actually posit the elided category in the structure, again, to support later semantic analysis. This only works if every single sense of the word has the same syntactic expectations. If it doesn't, if one sense requires a direct object and the other sense does not, then of course at this pre-semantic level you can't make this kind of a distinction. Okay, so you see the examples here. You can also enhance your confidence in these expectations if you incorporate expectation-driven rules using surfacey heuristics. I'm saying surfacey heuristics right now because, of course, later we can incorporate as many semantic heuristics as we want. But again, we're pre-semantic still at this point. So what I found actually in looking at Russian patterns of ellipsis, you often find ellipsis of direct objects in parallel constructions. If you have syntactic parallelism, let's not do semantic, well, lexical parallelism, right? So, yagnala, loshiknala, right? So you have both lexical and syntactic parallelism. Ya lublю мать, сильно люблю. Or the Schwartz example, whatever, you can read it. But the idea is, again, if you want to, when you're positing categories that might be elided, it makes sense to try to do that with some level of confidence, right? Because basically, if you're fully confident, great, posit it, and require that of your semantic analysis. If you're not completely confident, you probably want to back off and allow your semantic analysis engine to try the elliptical variant and try the non-elliptical variant and see which one it likes better. Okay, again, at this stage we're only trying to detect ellipsis. We haven't gotten to trying to resolve it yet. So when we resolve it, when that becomes our job, we have to keep in mind that ellipsis can be resolved either to a specific entity or to a generalized group. Like gori никогда не убивают, doesn't kill anybody. Атака не пугают, they scare people. Okay, so where are we now? Now we finished our R2. We've done all we can based on just the syntactic parse. Now we're moving to semantic analyzer. Within semantic analysis itself, we can do an awful lot of detection and resolution of referring expressions. So, in English, you don't have this problem in Russian, but in English, there are pleonastic it's all over the place, right? It is raining. I find it funny that. Detecting these is not as easy as you might think. If you're working within that co-reference resolution task, someone has manually weeded them out for you. If you're working in the real world, you have to figure it out by yourself. So we have patterns, we have lexical patterns that expect this, sort of like construction grammar type patterns. And idioms, of course, the same thing. Old Mr. Jones kicked the bucket. There is no referring expression kicked. There is no referring expression bucket. That being said, when you actually analyze kick the bucket, you do end up with the referring expression die, okay? Because events definitely are referring expressions. Why are they referring expressions? Well, they have to go into memory as an anchor, and you can actually add more information to them later. If you know more about how this guy died, you want to be able to have the anchor of the dying, and then find out all the reasons and the effects of whatever, right? So without the anchor, you can't have all this merging of information. Also, there are, anytime that you have a modal or an aspectual that at the surface structure takes an object as its, an ontological object as its complement, that is, John finished the book, you know for sure there's an elided event, okay? If you say John finished running, there's no elided event, you have the event. John finished the book, you know he had to either have finished reading it, writing it, tearing it apart, whatever he's doing, right? Same thing for John wants that book. Therefore, in the lexicon, we actually set up the expectation that if we have finished, want, start, followed by an ontological object, we put into the semantic representation, flag, we know there's an elided event here. We tell the reference resolution engine to go find what that event was, right? So we're preparing the ground for the reference resolution engine that comes next. There are also cases in which idiosyncratically a verb permits event ellipsis and you can resolve at the same time. So if you have the verb forget and then you have a concrete object that goes after it, well, concrete object of certain kinds, then it means I forgot to take my keys, bring my keys. You already know what the resolution is, and that is lexically therefore provided for. You don't have to wait for the reference resolution engine for that. Okay, so what would you do in Russian? Well, kind of the same thing, right? So an idiom, chort его знает. There's no chort, and there's no его, and nor is there any знает. So anyway, detection of elided verbs is exactly the same as in English. Or at least, exactly, that's a bad word. There are similarities, obvious similarities between Russian and English here. So I would treat them the same way. John кончил книгу воскресенья, obviously finished doing something with the book on Sunday. Okay. Also, since Russian is very elliptical in a lot of ways, and a lot of these elliptical possibilities are predictable based on patterns, then why not just lexicalize those patterns? And we have, actually I just finished a paper on how we handle multi-word expressions in English. And you can handle a whole lot of patterns of the type I'm showing here, simply based on large patterns in your lexicon. And once you have the expectations, then the whole structure is analyzed as a whole. Okay, so where we are now in this pipeline algorithm, we've already generated our text meaning representations. We've done the semantic analysis. Within that semantic analysis process, we've already detected a bunch of cases of ellipsis. We've resolved some cases of ellipsis already. Some referring expressions, like named entities, have been fully or partially treated. And very importantly, non-referring expressions, like it, like the bucket and kick the bucket, they have been detected and will not be considered further by the reference resolution engine. Okay? So basically, detection is one of those really not very paid attention to problems in reference resolution. It's like resolution, you know. We know we have pronouns he, they, she. We're going to resolve them. We'll detect them first, right? This is detection happens during semantic analysis. So now the agent needs to link all referring expressions to its memory. Okay, so we get the blue box. This is the actual reference resolution engine. I'm actually going to talk about this much less than I talked about everything else. I have papers on it, you can read about it. It's not that much different than it's not the point of this paper. The paper was really about how you distribute things across the whole architecture. But I can give you some kind of insights into how we do it. So basically, first we determine if each referring expression has a textual sponsor, and you can call it a co-referent. Now the thing is, again, we said that pointing to a co-referent is never the end of the task, but it's a very useful heuristic, obviously, right? So basically, if you have it and you can point it to the dog, then you point the dog to memory, and that's really how the process goes. Then decide if the actual link is a co-reference link, or if it's something like a bridging relationship, right? So if you have my room and the window, you have a has as part relationship. Or set member relationship, your team is mostly good, but the goalie's not so hot, and so on. I actually wrote a paper in 2009, an overview of, kind of for a more general AI audience, of all the kind of phenomena that aren't really being looked at in reference resolution. So sort of a menu, if you're interested in the menu kind of thing. So what kinds of heuristic evidence do we bring to bear? Well, of course we have semantic heuristics, because we already have created these text meaning representations. By the way, they're not 100% perfect every time. Do I have to say that out loud? I mean, I will. So they're not 100% perfect every time. We do the best we can. One of the, I talked before about trying to judge confidence in analysis. It's really important. At every stage of processing, we're judging confidence. And if we have high confidence, we move on and use certain heuristics in certain ways. If we have low confidence in some aspect of analysis, we can work in a different way. Okay, so that's really kind of important the whole way. But semantic heuristics. So things like, if we have, I don't know, the surgeon operated on the man and his hands didn't shake. Okay. Well, basically, it's probably the surgeon's hands who didn't shake. We know something about the world. I mean, it could have been the man's hands. Who knows, right? There's lots of things you could expect in the world, but we do use those kinds of ontological expectations that that surgery is generally performed by surgeons, and all that kind of general information. We have property value unification we try to go for, right? So if the ontology knows that someone is 2 years old, then he's probably not going to be Mr. Brown. Okay, we try to use that kind of information. There are a lot of parallelism-oriented heuristics. So if you have something like Jeannie made a quilt, she knitted it out of scraps of yarn. Okay, the fact that you have subject, verb, object, and the subjects are potentially co-referential, and the objects are potentially co-referential, and knit is actually a subtype of making. You've got such like great confidence, heuristic confidence in the fact that actually those co-reference relationships are really true. And actually I started thinking about this, namely because of the Russian date. This is one of the best predictors for a non-native speaker of Russian when you're allowed to leave out objects. Is, really bulk up on the parallelism in your clauses, and you can probably leave the object out. You might have to leave the subject out. There are also pragmatic heuristics. So there's this one kind of project I worked on a couple of years ago, trying to figure out how to resolve so-called broad referring expressions, like that, or this, or it, all of which can refer to either noun phrases, or clauses, or entire spans of text, right? So no one, hardly anyone works on these. A couple of people have tried to work on these in small ways. And because they're really difficult, I mean, how do you go about trying to figure out what that is referring to? Especially in a sentence like, that's great, where great doesn't tell you anything can be great. An object, a clause, a whole speech can be great. How do you go about this? Well, the fact is, if you try to be crafty, you can actually find some interesting heuristics. So, for example, if you have a conversation, so Jay says, I just made a killing on a stock deal, and Gary says, that's great. You can with very high confidence say that that refers to Jay's whole remark. The reason being that Jay's whole remark is one clause, there are no subordinate clauses, there are no negations, and there's a speaker change right before the that, and right before this single clause sentence, right? Once you start having multiple clauses, conjunction structures, things become complex a lot faster. But again, I'm not saying we can solve every problem immediately, but if you look for these islands of confidence, you can actually do a lot better, surprisingly, than you might think on these hard problems. And then, of course, you have to link everything to memory. So again, you're using the same type of heuristic evidence to link things to memory. Well, no syntactic evidence, obviously. But again, if you have someone in the text as crying all night, you're not going to link it to Mr. Jones, who's 57 years old, right? That just wouldn't make sense. So we use the same type of knowledge-based heuristic rules to link things to memory. So that actually, I finished on time. That is really all I want to say about this. Again, there's more in this particular paper. I left out practically all of the types of heuristics that I'm talking about because you can read them elsewhere. I really just wanted to give kind of an overview of how we approach the topic and even more importantly, what we believe the actual problem space to be, and definitely not the co-reference resolution task. So now I actually also wanted to leave time for questions, which I did. So you can just bring them on. Thank you.
Just a little one. You saw me look startled at the moment when you said that in English we might mistakenly parse the gap structure as just a conjoined NP which has apposition conjoined with the object of the first one. And then you gave an example, something like Ivan sel buterbrod и Masha sova. You couldn't make that mistake in Russian because the object would have to be accusative, and here we have Masha nominative, so that can't be conjoined to the other. And in general, you'll have a nominative accusative pair that wouldn't let you treat it as a positive.
Yeah, indeed,
so
in
fact, the rich morphology in Russian probably helps avoid a lot of the parsing errors that
Absolutely.
English runs.
Absolutely, yeah. That's true.
Any other questions?
Maybe.
Excuse me. Thank you for the talk. I've got a question about constraints.
I think it may be a little philosophical. Your example with playing musical instruments, there is a constraint that the subject of play should be human. But there are a lot of real-life examples in real-life examples in tests where the object of playing the musical instrument, not the object, sorry, subject is not a human, but it is an animal or a machine. And I thought that for nearly every constraint, there should be some examples that are valid, but that can violate that constraint. Are there any approaches to overcome this?
I gave a subset of the information in the ontology, but basically in the ontology we actually have 4 levels of constraints. Okay, so default constraint is like, surgeon, agent, surgery. Surgery has the agent of surgeon. That's the default. You expect a surgeon to do surgery. The SEM constraint, basic semantic constraint, is physician. Okay, because physicians can also do small surgeries, right? Relaxable to is our 3rd constraint, which is like any human, right? So you're on a battlefield, you're going to do a little surgery on your buddy, right? That can happen. So the relaxable to constraint is what you're talking about. And basically, that relaxable to also allows for things like metaphorical usages and things like that. So, I don't know, the government said, or whatever like that. The government, is that a human? No, not really, but it can also be the, the agent of a speech act. So we actually do provide for that in the ontology.
There is also a different constraint here, because if, let's say, a hi-fi system played Bach, then it would not be the agent while being the subject. It will be an instrument, a different case role. So that's also caught by the different nature, semantic, ontological nature of the meaning, of the lexical meaning.
Right, and if a construction is kind of, the lexicon ideally would kind of have senses for all these different things, right? So the subject, if it's going to be some kind of a music playing device, then you have a specific sense of play that maps the subject to the instrument, with the constraint being that this var1, this variable, has to be a music playing device. So what we do is, to the extent that we have the oomph and the time and the energy to do it, we actually do put those kinds of options in if they're very frequent. Otherwise, we have these back-off types of rules. Well, if an input does not really fit our expectations, how can we back off? Well, one of the general strategies of backing off is, if you don't find an agent, see if the thing will work as either an experiencer or an instrument, and that might solve the problem. Not 100%, but it can try.
Any other questions? Yes.
I would like to ask you I have 1.5 question. Do you rely, does your system rely on some particular syntactic framework, minimalism, dependency grabber, or something else? And if yes, do you distinguish such cases as elided subject and eliminated subject, zero subject, say, in this case it's like исключили, there was indeed it's like I, just the same with as in cases of ellipses. So is this relevant for the work of your agent or not?
Well, basically, I think our formalism is sort of like an extension of LFG. But we don't really we take more of a practical stance and a theoretical stance to most questions. So basically, what the actual status of a null subject is of less importance than how we're going to treat it practically.
I actually have 2 questions. So one about on the agents in general, and another one concerns a particular example from the presentation. One is, you had an example, горе никогда не убивает. And then you suggest that your mechanism, your system should supplement the missing object of that убивает. Is it reliable to supplement here something? Because if you take this phrase in isolation, it's probably, some human in general, or probably the speaker. It is not really certain for me. Or if you take it in a certain context, maybe it will be something different. Because we are talking about animals and some distress, and then a zoologist might say that it won't, I don't know, горе никогда не убивает обезьян или крокодилов. It will be clear from the context only. So can you reliably detect such context?
Well, at this point, what we do is we try to leave open the variance, right? So basically, I have actually a whole chapter in my book on ellipsis about this, where in a lot of cases you can have either a specific meaning or a generic, like you have a specific meaning, definitely, a generic meaning, definitely, and you have a lot of overlapping cases in which it's really not clear which one you have. Now, so the idea is first you look for a specific referent, right? So something about blah, 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 тигров горе никогда не убивает, okay? And you have this slot kind of waiting and looking for its antecedent, if there is a textual antecedent, right? So if there's one sitting right there, the accusative direct object, the preceding clause, and it actually really sort of fits, okay? Then you have some pretty strong evidence that there might be a co-reference relationship, or at least that in this case you're not really sure about it. Whereas if you just have, at the beginning of a context or something, then you've got no reference anyway, so therefore your confidence in a generic interpretation will go up, but based on the absence of a good candidate.
Thank you. And then another question about those agents which, as I understand the stance, are supposed to imitate intelligent beings. So do you program into them such things as moral instincts, any goal making, whatever?
Yeah, actually we have the whole thing. So there's plan and goal oriented reasoning. There is, like I said, there's a physiological simulation currently for esophageal diseases. There's interoception, which is the perception of diseases by the patient. There's decision making about actions. We have personality profiling. We have, so the patient has, some hypochondriac index, how much are they hypochondriac, are they very sensitive to pain, do they trust their doctor, are they trustworthy in general? So all these kind of different character traits actually do play a role in the decision functions that make them decide, are they going to go see the doctor and when? Are they going to agree to the doctor's advice or not? Are they going to take their medication or not? So these decision functions are supported by characterizing the agents in realistic ways.
But suppose, you're approached by the military and they ask you to make a killing robot. So will your robots do that happily or not?
Do they have to be happy when they do it? I don't know. Do you mean happily? You're saying happily, do you want to make happy robots?
Well, if you really build an analog of a thinking being, then you will probably insert some mechanism of motivation, which is, and at least part of it is emotions for humans, so it is natural to model that. Yeah. So maybe for a killing machine, it makes it happy to kill someone. I don't know.
I think that basically, it's a good point, but I think that our approach is we don't add everything we can into our agents, we add everything we need to. So if the only motivation for a robot needs to be, I want to save these humans that I'm working with, there's no reason to make it happy or unhappy about it, right? So there's no real motivation. The motivation for having the emotions in the virtual patient is that patients, their decision making, and in fact their disease progression is very much affected by their emotions. There's a very direct reason to have it. I don't think our robots would have to have emotion in order to be killing machines. Whether or not humans need emotion to do that, I don't know.
More questions?
I'd like to ask about how you work with the notion of reference and referring and non-referring groups. So, do you experience some problems with generalized groups? As I understood, you do not consider some groups to be referring, for example, Zbir in the example. But there are many other notions which are close to that, and if you experience some...
Well, only in the expression comes via. So like crazy, that's just an idiomatic expression. So only because it's an expression do we consider Zviv not a referring expression. Otherwise it would be certain. Does that answer the question?
Almost. If you have many generic expressions, which is also a problem for human beings to get to the same box, to come to the same referring box, is it also some kind of problem for you to consider generics or not?
Oh, so you mean if the referential ambiguity, do you mean? Like, so you're not really sure what to point to. It's a wonderful question, and I love that question, because we're actually working quite a bit on a notion that Sergey loves, which is benign ambiguity, right? So in some cases it doesn't matter. So for example, James Allen and his group, when doing their trains project, were working on things like they put the oranges into the boxcars, and they arrived at the station at 12 o'clock. What arrived? The oranges, the boxcars, or the oranges and the boxcars, right? Like, whatever, you know, I mean, really, if you point to one, your agent would be able to make the right inferences. If you point to the other, the agent would make the right inferences. If you thought both, the agent would make the right inferences, right? So I guess the idea is that if there really is ambiguity, and if our agent could detect the ambiguity, like just really say these are the two options, I mean, that's just yay. And if it only gets one of them, but the option is right, that's also pretty good. So I think that in some cases it is very, very difficult, especially, for example, in these cases of broad referring expressions, right? So my favorite examples, I made it up, but I like it, is say someone gave a whole lecture on all the reasons why you shouldn't smoke, okay? And then at the end of the lecture, he said, and that's why you shouldn't smoke. Now, he didn't mean every single thing he said in the lecture. He wasn't talking about, like, please close the door, he said it in the middle of the lecture, right? He meant, like, whatever relevant points about smoking he made. So therefore, and also, like, if a person was listening to that lecture, how much would a person actually remember of what he said why you shouldn't smoke, right? So these are really extraordinarily, like, interesting questions. And one of the reasons I think that computational linguists kind of wrap a noose around their own necks is by saying, there has to be one answer, it has to be right, and we have to evaluate it at 92%. Okay? Like, no, language isn't like that. So yes, there's going to be ambiguity, and yes, maybe we'll get some of it, we won't get some of it, and maybe humans can't get some of it, and that's great, that's language, I like that.
Any other questions? Well, if there are no more questions, let's say